Let's paint a Deredeo. Hello, I'm Marcel.
And I'm Mrs. Snakeworks.
So firstly, we've primed all the sub-assemblies in black.
Does it come in black?
We mixed a little imperial blue in with light grey for a base colour, the same way a DJ saves your life in the mix.
It's not a problem that I can't fix, because I can do it in the mix.
We then apply this base colour to all of the armour panels. It might look a bit patchy now, but I will fix it later. Honest.
Trust me.
With that first thin layer applied, we have this. It looks a bit like the colour of the TIE bombers in Empire Strikes Back.
This week, I have been mostly watching Duncan Rhodes' Painting Academy. He's been showing us how to thin our paints properly. I really need to pay attention to this.
Where in the world you are when you open the paint, all these things and more make a difference on things.
So I have to be honest here and say this probably turned out to be my worst paint job in a long time. Many a mistake was made, and I wasn't overly happy with the result. Should we see what went down?
The next two colours we are mixing are pink and white to make a light pink. We apply yet another patchy base coat of the light pink to any areas we want to be yellow later. The knee pads, the guns and some missile launcher panels. I know it looks patchy, but Marcel's just working out a colour guide to begin with. We will come back and sort all this later. Honest.
I thought I would just put a thin layer of each colour on the miniature first, acting as a sort of guideline, before painting it properly. I did this to prevent me from having to repaint areas I decided I wanted to be a different colour. It turns out this takes just as long, if not longer. The first of many mistakes on this miniature. Okay, so next up it's Vallejo Hull Red. I then applied Hull Red to all the areas I wanted to be gold or bronze. Things like some metal panels, the bullet casing, nubs, and general details. So I was going to paint all of the metal in NMM. That's why all my gold colours start off with brown. This was another mistake.
It's white paint next, and in this case it's bold titanium white by Pro Acryl. Rumour has it this is the best white out there at the moment. What do you think? We then gave the helmet a couple of thin coats of the white. Again, we'll be returning to it later.
So I realised later I wasn't going to change my mind about colour placement anyway. So I should have just painted those parts to completion. Oh well. It's Vallejo Dark Grey up next. With the dark grey, I then base coat all the areas I want to be a silvery metal colour. Yes, yet again, this was going to be the base for some more NMM. Another thing I didn't do. Do you see now what I mean about all the mistakes?
Next up is VMC Black, one of my favourite black paints. Using the black, we then painted all the areas I wanted to be black. I think it was just the gun casings in this instance.
I think the black was the only colour I ended up liking, the colour I hardly used. Here we have all the parts laid out with all the colours finalised. Funnily enough, we didn't change any. Returning to our blue-grey mix, we then apply a couple more thin coats to all of the armour areas. Here's what it looked like when that was all applied, a lot less patchy than before. See, I told you to trust me, ye of little faith.
Next up, Marcel added progressively. Next up, Marcel added progressively more light grey into the mix for the highlights. Marcel went for a sort of sketchy, broad, volumetric style this time, as he doesn't usually paint like this. You need to check this before you let me read it. Marcel then finished the grey off with an almost white edge highlight on the most prominent surfaces and edges. I will be interesting to see how it ends up. I think that was supposed to be it will be interesting to see how it ends up. I told him not to do it, but he never listens to me.
Long story short, I hate it. Anyway, okay, so it's now the time to fiddle with the pink bits. Much like with the grey, I added progressively more white into the pink and attempted some more volumetric highlighting on those pink parts to add as much contrast as I felt was right. Again, this was my first time painting in this style, but it felt like I was on the right track here. Now, when I was highlighting those pink parts, I felt I was on the right track. I felt like I had my method nailed down, as it were. But that wasn't the end of the pink. Oh no.
It's Pro Aqua White time. Okay, so I wanted to paint the pink weapons a little different. Let's dry brush some white on, as there's a lot of detail on them to pick out. With the white dry brushed on, all our pink parts were ready for the next stage.
I'm going to assume that all you guys know that all those areas I've painted pink were going to end up yellow. It is a method of painting yellow which I think does look really good and works well and is quite easy. Our magic yellow of choice will be Imperial Fist's contrast paint. I then apply the Imperial Fist yellow to all of those pink areas, just colouring them in. I don't thin it or anything, I just use it neat. After a few minutes colouring in, we have all the yellow areas ready. I think they look really nice. The yellow parts were one of the things I was very happy with at the end of painting. Also, I do always recommend leaving your yellow tint to harden overnight, as it takes ages to fully dry for some reason. Maybe it's just me.
We can paint the helmet now while the yellow dries. Let's return to our good friend Pro Aqua White. We then give the helmet a couple of thin coats of the white. We want a nice solid coat to work from.
Now Pro Acryl has some pretty good coverage, to be fair, but can you recommend any decent alternatives? I find the Vallejo white is pretty good too. I tried to be clever next. For a shade, we're going to use Drucky Violet. It's the opposite colour to yellow, you see. We gave all the recesses on the helmet a wash with some of that thinned Drucky Violet. As his helmet was so small, it didn't take very long at all. Now I would like to know, are the helmets on Dreadnoughts actually heads? Or are they just a facade sensor thing that's dressed up to look like a head?
Here we have some footage of the Dreadnought's leg. I assume it's to look at while the helmet wash was drying. And now the finished yellow of the weapons. I think I see what's happened here. These shots are out of sequence. They were supposed to show you how the yellow from earlier came out. I do think it looks nice though.
Can we count the out of sequence shots part of the mistake tally for this video? I reckon we can. Wait, no. The shots weren't out of sequence. I used the same purple wash from the helmet to do some pin washing on those yellow areas. I do apologise for my amateur video making skills. If you would like to submit a complaint, then feel free to do so in the comments below. I will be sure to read them all. And then do nothing about it, a bit like the BBC or the local council. I'm still waiting for them to fix my streetlights outside.
We return to the helmet now. We tidy up any of the white areas where you might have got some wash on where we didn't want it. A couple of thin coats does the trick nicely. That's come out crisp and clean, however it does need a yellow helmet stripe. Using Marcel's best freehand, we then painted a yellow helmet stripe in using the pink and yellow method. Some people call it the pillow method. I think it's come out rather nice. I'm really proud of my husband. I love him so much, and a lot of other women are jealous I have him. Right.
Now, I always thought the pillow method referred to something else. Something not painting related, you know? A few weeks ago, we took Snakeworks Jr to Cambridge and met the local fire crew. They invited him into the fire engine for a bit of a pokeabout, where he had a wonderful time.
Yeah, you could charge for this, didn't you?
I'm not sure who enjoyed it most, Snakeworks Jr or Mrs. Snakeworks.
Let's bust out the Vallejo air gun metal. We apply the gun metal to all the areas we wanted to be metal. Funny that. Mainly hinges and ammo feeds and gubbins like that. According to YouTube lore, when you finish the stage you have to arrange all the parts neatly in shot. we are going to get arrested again as our weapons were not arranged in the neatest manner.
I find I have to leave metal paints a good while to dry, as applying washes on them too soon always seems to make a mess. Maybe I'm just impatient. Does it happen to any of you? For our metal wash, we will be using Nuln oil. This is the new formula. It comes in a smaller bottle for the same price. I then give all of the metal areas a wash with the Nuln oil. If it starts to pool anywhere, I try my best to wick it away. I say I try my best because there's always one bit I seem to miss. Dried pools of Nuln oil look awful.
While we wait for the metal washes to dry, we can work on the plasma weapons. We based the plasma coils in white to start with. The first colour we shall use is Vallejo Fluorescent Green. It's always best to shake the living shit out of these fluorescents, as otherwise it separates out into nasty liquid goop. We then give the plasma coils a few thin coats of the fluorescent green to make a solid fluorescent green base. Next up, we need a darker green. We are using Vallejo Light Green. I know it says light, but it's still darker than the fluorescent. We are going to be doing some dry brushing next. Marcel's using these makeup brushes he stole from me as we can't afford Artis Opus brushes.
There are a few who can.
Using my makeup brush, I then dry brush the edges of the plasma coils with the darker green. I actually quite liked the look of it here, and I should probably have missed out the next steps.
Our next colour is Vallejo Violet. This may have been a mistake. Again, using the dry brush, we then dry brush the top edges of the plasma coils with that violet, giving us a darker, cooler looking edge. Perhaps.
Well, that was the plan anyway. I think I should have probably used just a slightly darker shade of the green. The violet, I feel, was just too dark. I'm interested to hear what you guys think though. Here's what the plasma coils look like with that violet applied. Sadly, my dry brushing was a bit messy and I got some violet on the weapon casing edges. I should probably mask that off next time. Next, we then make a mix of Pro Acryl White and some gloss varnish and a little water. I then apply this white mix to the area the plasma coils are attached to the weapon's casing to give the illusion of brightness. The gloss varnish is supposed to help the paint flow easier. I say supposed, I ended up making a right mess. I do have old man's jitters now though. I'm not as calm and collected as I used to be. I think I need to take some diazepam before I do that next time.
That left us with this. It's not far off, but something doesn't look quite right. If you know what, then please let us all know in the comments below. Marcel had an idea what was up, so we returned now to the fluorescent green. We then glazed on a very thin coat or two of the fluorescent green to hopefully tie all those colours together. This is what the final result looked like. What do you think? Is it better with or without the glaze? You decide.
I do think I need to work on my plasma gun effects. If you know any good tutorials for them, then please share them with us in the description below. Next up, it's Retributor Gold. I like this gold as it looks gold and it covers well. Using the gold, I then paint all the areas on the Deredeo that I want to end up, you guessed it, gold. Again, we won't be doing NMM this time. And as Aragorn would say, maybe one day when we forsake our friends and forsake all bonds of fellowship, we will try NMM Gold. But it is not this day.
When the age of men comes crashing down, but it is not this day.
Fan favourite wash now is Agrax Earthshade. Hands up if you remember Devlin Mud. Was it better? We then apply a wash of the Agrax Earthshade to all the gold painted areas. Again, doing our best to prevent pooling.
Now I find there's always this weird fine line between just enough wash to get the shading you like and a giant pooling mess. Or is that just me too? Am I the only one making all these mistakes? We now return to the Vallejo Air Gunmetal. Using the gunmetal, we then reapply it to all of the metal areas, but leave the shade from before in the recesses. This also allows us to tidy up any pooling from the shade. which was handy as there was a lot of it. Retributor Gold back up next. I've just realised I call it Retributor Gold, but it's actually Retributor Armour. Oh well, every day's a school day. Using the gold, we then do the same as we did with the silver paint. Tidy up any pooled areas and paint on some nice highlights. I think it looks lovely. Now I try not to use too much gold on my metal details. Again, I find there's a fine line between breaking up all the metal and having a garish mess. Feel free to agree or disagree with me.
Some Vallejo flat red now. Why is it flat, you ask? Well, I've no idea. Okay, so using the flat red, we then paint all the little missile trips in the Areola missile launcher. There's quite a few, so we took our time to do a nice, neat job.
And not once did we get that red paint where we shouldn't have done. And I am not making that up. We have some flat yellow up next. Another flat colour. We still don't know what it means. We mix in a little of that flat yellow into the red to make a highlight colour. Using this mix, we then highlight the tips of the missiles in the missile launcher. I tried not to add too much yellow as to make it look orange. Now a lot of people say that painting red is quite difficult without turning it pink or orange. How do you highlight your red?
We have here some Vallejo model colour black. It has a wrinkly label for reasons unknown.
Not for reasons unknown, I told you.
Using the black, we fill in all the lenses on the Deredeo. There's some on the missile launcher, the plasma guns, and don't forget his eyes. We then pick up some white paint. Using the white paint, we then paint inside all of those lenses, leaving a black ring around the outside. A bit like eyeliner, I suppose.
It might have been easier to just add a black panel lining wash over a white base, but this is the way that I like to do it. We have the trifecta of fluorescent paints up next. Magenta, green and orange. All three will require a considerable amount of shaking to make them usable. Some lenses I paint with the magenta, and I like to use a couple of thin coats. And some lenses I paint with the green. Again, I like to use a couple of thin coats to give a brighter, smoother effect. I also add a little white into the mix and paint in the centre of those lenses for an enhanced glowing effect. It's subtle, but I think it works. I also painted some orange lenses, but you can't see them here. You can, however, see I painted the helmet's eyes in magenta, and I felt it was a good colour for it. With all the glowing lenses painted, the Deredeo Dreadnought was nearing completion. Hopefully, we'll only need a couple more paints to finish it off.
Turns out we need a load. First up, 6 different coloured paints. I won't list them here, else we will be here forever. Using all those different coloured paints, we then paint all the individual wires and pipes on the plasma cannonade. Cannonade. Some people might choose to use just the one colour. As Marcel's an idiot, he decided to paint them all differently. After a long painting session, all the wires were painted. I think it now looks like some sort of computer cable bundle. I like it.
There were actually more than 6 wires, so some colours I had to double up on. Back to the Nuln oil. Using the Nuln oil, we then shade all those pipes. Be careful not to add too much or you will create big nasty pools of wash. We spoke about this before. When the shade is dry, we then go back in with the base colour and do a little tidying and highlighting. After that step, all of our pipes and cables and wires are nicely coloured and yet defined. I never want to have to do that again. It took what felt like a whole evening's painting session. Now if you want to get your own Deredeo Dreadnought to spend an evening's painting session on, Oh, I'm turning into Sean Connery now. Anyway, if you want to get your own Deredeo Dreadnought, then check out the link up here somewhere. I'll also put one down in the description below for you.
It's time for a cocktail. Some gloss varnish, Lamian medium, Druki violet, and some nun oil.
Nuln.
Some gloss varnish, Lamian medium, Druki violet, and some Nuln oil.
Yeah.
Using that cocktail, we then do a little panel lining. Marcel did his best not to go over the edges, as it were. Oil paints are better for this, but we couldn't be arsed with all the glossing and faffing that oil paints require. With the panel lines all linked in, we have this. The Dreadnought is pretty much fully painted now, but there's a little more to do.
Now a miniature isn't a miniature until you've sorted its base out. If you would like to discuss basing, then feel free to come and join our friendly Discord server that's not behind a paywall, the link to which is up here somewhere or in the description below. We look forward to chatting to you there. Anyway, let's get that base done, shall we? To make sure we glued the Deredeo Dreadnought down in the proper place on the base, I drew around his feet with a Sharpie. I'm not going to lie, I was terrified I would get that Sharpie on the paintwork. Luckily, I didn't. With those guidelines applied, I then gave the Deredeo's feet a good slopping of Tamiya plastic cement. This time I used the thick gloopy stuff as there were a lot of textures on there to stick together. Then we just waited for it to dry.
Now, while we put our paints away, I just wanted to give a massive loving shout out to all the channel members and Patreons. Dan Yallop, Lee Blackley, Donald, Pine Tree, Bobzilla, Charles Marlowe, Andrew Merrington, Dr. Lee, and our newest member, Nick Ellingham. Thank you all so much for supporting us. We love you all.
We do indeed. Now I didn't show the base painting in this video as I didn't want to double its length. I will show you this though. This is the mask I use for airbrushing. You can see it's got quite the build-up of filth on there. But interestingly, as it's used for airbrushing, it has this. Don't know if you can read that. An inscription that says, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Lawrence. If you are enjoying the content here on the channel, then please consider joining the Patreon, the link to which is in the description below, or up here somewhere. And by the way, remember Mrs. Snakeworks said that when we hit 10,000 subscribers, we're allowed to buy a Warhound Titan, so please subscribe and let's smash that target ASAP. Or ASP as my old friend Carl would say. Anyway, without further ado, let's check out the finished article, shall we?
And here it is, the finished Red Scorpions Deredeo Dreadnought with plasma cannon nades.
I would say I'm really happy with some of it and disappointed in other parts. I really like how the yellow areas have come out, and with further practice they should look even better next time. The grey, however, I think looks a bit rubbish, to be honest. Some people said it looks like an NMM attempt, which wasn't my intention, and someone else said it looks cell shaded. That's not my intention either, so maybe next time we won't be using this method.
The glow on the plasma guns I think looked really good up until a point. With a little more finesse, I think we could get them looking good the next time we attempt such a feat. I really want to know what you guys think of it, so please let us all know in the comments below.
Maybe we will do better next time. If you want to see some more painting guides and tutorials, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching.